Hello and welcome to the last little segment in my series of videos on this wonderful 2-litre gear automatic estate given to me by Jason for the week, and I've spread this into a few different videos. Naturally, a Zetec cam belt change that was done to an absolute T with the free addition of a coil pack. Okay, Jason, and this car now flies down the road as it should, followed by a lovely review of which I thoroughly enjoyed driving this car and experienced a 2-litre automatic for myself. And not many people will say that, because a 2-litre automatic in any form is rare, let alone like this. I would say this is probably a one-off. I don't think there's another 2-litre automatic estate with the versatility pack, especially the last point. But anyhow, this is about common problems, and many of you have watched videos relating to different areas that I've done on a Mark 1. So my earliest videos were common problems, and I wanted to share as much experience I have and what to look out for, particularly on a sort of buyer's guide perspective of things. But I've never actually focused on the Zetec engine. I've referred to it, but I can't really refer to it in physical form on camera because I own a Sigma, a 1.6. I can't really refer to the Zetec specifically, but now I can, because it's right in front of us. And I have gone through a few problems on that timing belt video, but I'm going to go through again specifically on what problems you need to know about a Zetec engine, what can catch people out who are not familiar with this engine in a Mark 1. Hello my dear, looking very clean and tidy under here and sounding exceptionally quiet, as all Sigma and Zetec engines sound. The difference at idle speed is very, very minimal in terms of sound. This cruise control cable keeps coming up its own little grommet there. By the way guys, you will have a hole here permanently. Even if you don't have cruise control, you'll have this bracket with a hole here, and you'll just have one throttle cable. But Jason, obviously on this example, Jason's car has cruise control, so we have a second cable going to a cruise control box. That cruise control box, and I'm going to start off with that, that's quite a rare item to find in Europe and in the UK especially. In America, that's where it's more common. In fact, Jason, as you have seen in that episode, has bought a much better steering wheel. Of course, Jason needed to buy a steering wheel with the controls, with the actual slots where the controls actually link in, the cruise control buttons. That makes it quite a rare steering wheel to find over here. He was lucky to get that one. He did a very good job indeed, because he'd have had to have gone to America, preferably for that steering wheel. So the problem with the cruise control in a Mark 1 is that it's fantastic when it works, and it certainly works on this car from how Jason reports, and I would love to experience that on another occasion. I'm sure he'll let me get it on the motorway and experience it for myself. But also, it can be a bit of a pain when things like that, or a toy, as I say, because this car is full of toys, starts going wrong. Where'd you start? I would start with the box, personally. I think the boxes can go a little bit funny. This cable runs through an actuator, which is very actually close to the inlet runner control that you would get on an ST170. You have gears. You have a few little slots here and there. There's a bit of a mechanism going on, but it is also controlled by the ECU by a little solenoid inside it. That solenoid can pack up. Equally, obviously, there might be an ECU related issue, but usually it is at the control box side of things. Now, I don't know enough about that to dissect it, but from what I've heard, those are the main issues, where either the cable snaps or the gears need some re-greasing inside, etc. It's very similar to the sort of problems that you would get on the ST170 with that inlet runner control, but it works in entirely a different context. It utilises the speed sensor, the brake pedal position sensor, and one or two others, but usually the fault with the cruise control is related to that. If you're having a brake pedal problem where you don't have any brake lights, that will be a symptom that that's going wrong, and therefore the cruise control is not going to work because the brake pedal position sensor isn't working. However, That's very rare. I've never known one to fail at this age, so don't worry about that. But as far as cruise control is concerned, just be aware if you've got one fitted, because there isn't an awful lot of knowledge that I can give you at the moment because I don't know enough myself, but that's what I've seen, okay? Now, the next problem, and the biggest one really. In a Mark 1 application, a Zetec engine was the preferred big petrol engine. And for that reason, the infrastructure is similar, but different to what you'd have had in an Escort, of which this engine was mainly a 1.6, and the Mondeo, which is a 1.8 2-litre. May have some different things going on here, but on a Mark 1, there are 2 weak points, and it is, again, very stupid issues. The main reason why these engines die is because of the same reason that every Sigma dies. You haven't changed the timing belt on time, and you haven't changed the oil enough, and it's gone low, you've ran low, and your big end is knocking all over the place. Now, on this engine, that is not so bad, because you can change the bearings in situ. It's very DIY friendly underneath. You can get brand new big end bearings, and you can have your, obviously you can have your crank reground, and this engine is not as tolerant as a Sigma. A Sigma is a highly tolerant engine. Lots of tolerances, a much higher level, and with a Sigma, Ford say you cannot rebuild the bottom end because we have a cam leather bearing sort of style arrangement where it stiffens it up at the bottom. Ford does not provide bearings for that engine, but other people have proved otherwise by using bearings off different engines that fit a Sigma and fit well. So the days where a Sigma will knock its engine in the lower bit and people can't repair them are slowly dying, because we're in an age now where getting a replacement engine is still obtainable but difficult, becoming more difficult. So therefore people are looking at actually salvaging the engine they have and rebuilding it from the bottom. We've seen a few instances of this, but again, a Zetec engine is way more DIY friendly in the bottom end department, because Ford say you can mess about with it and change bearings. However, I would still argue that these engines are so obtainable that the Zetec engine is just obtainable as a Sigma. I would recommend just replacing the engine. I wouldn't really bother. These engines do not suffer from many other issues. I've never known them to blow a head gasket. If that happens under any circumstance, you need a new engine because you have severely warped this head and engine. I would not even hesitate in replacing it in that scenario. You must have neglected it to get to that point, I will tell you, by making sure that as long as you've got coolant in the system, you will have no issues whatsoever. But mainly timing belt and oil, which has been done on this engine. So the 2 big killers of this engine have been sorted. So this engine will live on for many more years now. I did slightly touch on this in the cam belt video, but basically on a Mark 1 you could not get this Zetec engine as a silver top. That is a Mondeo thing, okay? That is a complete Mondeo thing. Maybe it was fitted to Escorts as well at the same time. You have an aluminium cam cover, I think it was a 3-bolt or a 4-bolt water pump, hydraulic tappets, and a few other bits and pieces were changed at the bottom side. The pistons, the rods were a bit weaker. People prefer black tops in Mondeo circles. Around January, I think it was early 1998, where they switched from the silver top to the redesigned black top. Black plastic cam cover, a 3-bolt water pump, which is the main indicator, as well as obviously, apart from this, obviously, stronger rods, stronger pistons. There's a few other instances, but the main difference as far as Mark 1 owners are concerned is the change from hydraulic tappets to flat bucket tappets, solid tappets that just require shims. Oh, exactly like a Sigma. Yes, because the Sigma came out in '95 with solid tappets from the start. And I think Ford realised, because of honestly, the amount of engineering that went into that with Yamaha's help, they obviously discovered that they could completely replace hydraulic tappets with solid ones with no loss of refinement, and it is utterly true. I think if there's one engine, and two engines in this case, that proved that solid tappets don't have to sound loud, it's both the Zetec and the Sigma. They were probably the first engines to do so. However, I don't know of other engines that have done that. It may have been done before, I don't know. But hydraulic tappets were out. No Mark 1 with any petrol engine got solid hydraulic tappets. They all had solid tappets. If they get knocky, usually it's because of poor oil changes. I have known Zetec engines to do over 300, 400,000 miles and be still within the valve clearances, okay, which should be checked to 100,000 miles. However, don't bother, because it's not necessary. I would only ever really do that if there was a sign that there was a valve lash problem, i.e. the clearance between the cam and the valve was not enough. There would be performance issues with that as well. There'd be very obvious signs there's a lack of power going on here, but you really don't need to worry about that. And no Mark 1 will have that worry in the future, because the only remaining ones with a Zetec or Sigma or diesel will be low mileage ones. Even the high mileage diesel ones may go the way of the wind in the next 5 years or so. So I suspect only the low mileage ones like this will survive. And 86,000 miles for £750, guys, this is what Jason bought the car for. Utterly ridiculous. But that's the main thing. Cooling system, we touched on the head gasket. As long as you've got coolant in the engine, you are not going to blow the head on one of these. It is not, honestly, you cannot do it. They are actually more robust probably than Sigmas in that respect, but they're equally probably just as robust. I've never known either engine to blow a head gasket unless you have really been silly or you've modded it. That is something I'm going to touch on in a second. Zetec engines are very favoured by the boys that like to mess about with their cars. But the main thing that you really need to keep an eye on, and it is something that I'm definitely going to speak to Jason about, it is something that is going to be sorted in another episode, hopefully when the car comes back to me at some point, and that will be this coolant pipe that runs along the top of the front, or above the radiator along this cross member, okay, at the front. This pipe is known, it's fully plastic. This one looks like it's been replaced. I can't see a Ford stamp or sticker on it, so I think this has been replaced. This is a serious fault. The plastic cracks, you will leak coolant, big style, and you may overheat your engine. However, you'd be stupid to do that, because you'll see the temperature gauge go up. There'll be so many warning signs that there is a problem here with this pipe. But when this pipe goes, it goes. Get it changed if you are not sure if it has been changed, because be aware this will burst at any moment's notice. Personally, this item is a service item. You change this probably, in my opinion, every 10 years if there is no history. If there is history, sorry. If there's no history, you change it immediately, okay? If there's history, go on 10 years. And I think that's a pretty good bet. If it's an aftermarket one, I'd give it 5 years. If it's a genuine Ford one, give it 10, and buy genuine if you can, and you can still get them. They're not expensive. However, there is a thing where you can buy a metal one now, because it's such a problem on these that some clever person somewhere saw an opportunity of making a bit of money and making a metal one. Full marks to that person, because you'll never have the problem again. And why that isn't metal, I don't know. Weight saving, cheapness, yes. They shouldn't have done it. That's Ford cost cutting, and it really is a poor bit of design. Plastic, heat, coolant, age, you get the picture. Then we have this problem down here, which is the thermostat housing. It is bolted directly to the engine on the side of this cylinder head here, in exactly the same place that you would expect a thermostat on an old CVH. One of the true telltale signs that some of the old CVH arrangements, like the oil filter at the back and the thermostat housing in this position, were carried over. And my God, This is a problem. Unlike a CVH where it's old-fashioned and metal with a gasket, this has got a seal on it, but it's plastic. It's a big massive piece of plastic with these long bolts that go through, and my goodness me, that is such a problem child. It is, again, I'm going to change this and recommend changing that. Get a genuine one. Do not get aftermarket ones. They don't last. They can last you maybe 3 or 4 years if you're lucky, but really honestly, if you want to look after this long term, get a genuine one fitted. It's the first thing that I look at straight away to see if I can see a Ford emblem, and I can on this one, but I've got a suspicion that it might be the original, judging on other things that I've seen on attached to it. So again, that's going to possibly be changed, even if it hasn't already done so. If you've got no history, change it again. When these crack, you'll see coolant everywhere. Coolant will be on top of the gearbox. It'll be very obvious. It'll be leaking onto the floor. So I will state that the pipe and the thermostat housing must be done. I think Jason is also probably going to invest in a new coolant bottle. I've told him that that's a good idea. Even though this doesn't look as if it's cracking, check it please. It's a slightly bigger bottle than the rest. You can accidentally fit this to a 1.4, 1.6 if you wanted a bigger bottle, but it's a mistake that a few people have made. You can put that on a Sigma easily and it will fit perfectly fine, but equally, you know, just replace it, because you don't want that cracking on you. Again, it's another way for coolant to get out and really go on you. So 1, 2, 3, get them sorted with the cam belt and the oil. Just do all that. There are a few other things that you will obviously notice. Firstly, we have a mass airflow sensor. Now this sensor is a slightly different one to the one I've got fitted to my car, different parts number, only applicable to the 1.8 or 2 litres. So check that out. These are very important. This car is not fitted with a MAP sensor as far as I'm aware. It's got a MAF sensor. You either had one or the other on a Mark 1, okay? Later Fords have both of them, but this, just a MAF. If that goes, your car will go into limp home mode, because it will have no idea how much air is coming into the engine. So you will know, it will throw up a code. I can't remember the code off by heart, but it's a very familiar one to me. But just check it, okay? If you have some running issues. Sometimes they throw a code, sometimes they don't throw a code, and you might have some lack of performance. The genuine ones are very difficult to come by. I suggest getting second-hand ones, because like I've said in the past, aftermarket ones are absolute rubbish, and it will make it run worse than an old one that's starting to go, believe you me. So don't worry about it. Coil packs, yes, something of a subject on this car, because it now has the uprated coil pack that's been in my spares. I've given Jason the option of replacing it with a Bosch one or keeping this Delphi one on. You can get the uprated coil packs like for any petrol model. Please do so, because as I've witnessed myself, the original coil packs, if they do exist, they're going to be weak. And the difference from after changing the coil pack along with the cam belt change has transformed this car. Jason is absolutely going to love this when he picks it up, because it's got more power. And the sign that it's a bit low on performance is usually a coil pack that's just getting slowly old and weak, and it can't put enough electricity out to the plugs. So just check that out. HT leads, be aware, you cannot interchange these HT leads with a 1416. Completely different set. Getting genuine ones are very expensive. I've cleaned these up and I've given Jason some spare ones that were kindly donated to me for free. So I'm glad it's going to a good home. So at least he's got some sets to play around with. This is a good set as far as I'm concerned. I suspected the HT lead had gone. It hadn't. It was just a coil pack that had absolutely gone. Also, spark plugs. Do not put the spark plugs off a 1416 into a 182 litre. You will get misfiring. They are not completely different spark plugs, but you try and see and mix the plugs up. If I put one of the plugs off my engine in this, oh god, it will run like a dog, absolute dog poo. Luckily the spare ones that I had were applicable for this engine. They weren't applicable for my own engine, just saying. And obviously these two nasty bolts are ready to shear the next time that this exhaust manifold needs to be replaced. Maybe it will come off. Obviously we've got the cat down there, just below the manifold itself. These heat shields can rust, and this one is starting to rust quite badly, and some of them are even worse than this. A lot of people just throw these in the bin and don't put a heat shield on. I say stick it back on, find another one, because there are ones out there. There are good second-hand ones. I just hope that there is going to be an aftermarket manufacturer who will make heat shields like this, because we're struggling at the moment to find this kind of stuff, and it's a very obvious one. I don't like seeing no heat shields here. It really is important to keep the heat off this area. There's a reason for that. I mean, look at this. You got, you know, you got your lambda, your pre-cat lambda wire here. Your post one is right down there. Very accessible, I will say. And that's the advantage of having this engine. Power steering pumps can get a bit rusty. I don't know why they get rusty on the Zetec engines. They don't really suffer from that on the Sigma unless you neglect them. But it doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect the functionality. But the power steering switch, please change that. And accessibility on these engines are fantastic compared to the 1.6 with air conditioning, where the pump is at the back. On any other engine, it will be at the front. With me, because I've got no aircon, on the 1.6, it's down there, obviously. You don't get stretch belts on Zetec engines, so we don't have to worry about faffy stretch belts. But please, this was something that I had to cut out the video because it was so poor quality. You need a very, very long 15mm spanner to get that tension slackened, to get that belt on and off. You need one of those aviation spanners, a very long one. You can try a 15mm and then another spanner, you know, where you link spanners together. You could try that, but it'll hurt your fingers. Try an aviation one, and that will sort the issue out. And you can't use a ratchet, no room for the sockets, just saying. Now, generally, as we come to the back here, we've had a replacement alternator. Again, they're very reliable alternators, the original ones, but sometimes, well, this has only done 86,000 miles, so it's hard. The original alternator couldn't have failed from a brush issue, unless it's done a lot of low mileage driving, which I doubt. So sometimes they can just blow one, or the bush, the actual bearing can go, which might have been the case for the old one. But you will notice here that the fuel feed hose, which goes to the fuel pressure regulator here, looks very similar to what I'm used to, just it's not over here, it's over here. You got your fuel rail here with your electronics here with your injectors, exactly the same as what most people are used to with a Sigma, with a little breather here that goes into the airbox. They don't cause any issues really. Just make sure that this mechanism is nice and free. Unfortunately, the idle control valve is on the opposite side of this inlet manifold, and to be honest, unless you've got facilities to rent a ramp, I'd recommend getting the whole manifold off and doing what I did to Nick's car and having a good old clear out of that manifold to make sure all the coke has gone from the inside of the pipes. Clean the idle control valve, because they cause just as much issues with idle as they do in the Sigma. But on the Sigma, it's right here and very accessible. There's no excuse to that engine, but I feel for Zetec owners because it is a pain to get to. So I would recommend at this age taking the whole lot off. I really do recommend that. You will need to remove the studs to do that, and I may be able to show you, because it's something I would recommend to Jason, and maybe I can show you that one day, getting the whole thing off. I would like to do that actually. But this is the main feed, and this is the return line that just goes to the bottom there. Okay, we've got one feed there as well. The return line is just a metal pipe and sort of runs there and around there. Sorry for the poor lighting. We've got a cam position sensor at this point, just where my finger is. Just watch out, they can leak a bit of oil, but don't worry. You can change the O-ring. I just changed the whole sensor because, quite frankly, they can give up as well. The crankshaft position sensor is where it should always be, on the bottom front by the bell housing where my finger is. That's all normal, really. The exhaust system is very similar. They tend to be quite hardy, and a lot of them are still running on a lot of their original systems, which is remarkable. This car, being a low mileage car, as you can guess, is definitely not on its original stuff. It would have been changed. Low mileage exhausts don't last well. Where we've got the charcoal canister valve, and we've got all the vacuum lines that go to the inlet in exactly the same way that it goes and connects all to the inlet on a Sigma. It's just all at the back, and it looks a little bit different, but it's all there in the same context. You've got a vacuum line for your servo, a vacuum line for your charcoal canister. It's all very self-explanatory. It just looks a bit different, but it's all there, and that's the beauty of the Sigma and the Zetec. Now that's why both these engines were branded as the family of Zetec engines, and obviously the Sigma was branded as the Zetec SE, and this was just called 16 valve Zetec. They were so similar but different, because you can obviously tell the difference. Exhaust at the front, inlets at the back. Why they changed it for the Sigma, I don't know. Maybe they thought that an underfloor cat was better than one at the front, but equally an underfloor cat doesn't get as hot as quickly as that, so I'm not quite sure what that was about. But they are incredibly similar, and they are a delight to work on, and their infrastructure is very similar, just fractionally different. You know, little things like captive bolts. Instead of using captive bolts, these bolts will just fall out, just the old-fashioned way. But apart from that, there's not really anything I can add. The engine mountings can equally go just as on any models. You've got the gearbox mount, you've got the swing mount, the dog armour, as some people call it. They equally are pretty much the same for all the petrol models. This is slightly different, having just 2 studs instead of 3, but there's no difference otherwise. Just check that they're not leaking any oil down on the chassis leg. I've cleaned all this out, so Jason can keep an eye on this and check if there's any leaks coming from anywhere. There is a breather down here. Now this breather seems to be leaking a little bit. I think I might have to deal with that the next time this car comes to me. It's a bit of a mess, and I was a bit of a mess sorting all this out, so one job at a time, but it's going to be done. Apart from that, there really isn't anything that I haven't covered before. There is really nothing to say about this. Obviously plastic intake manifold as usual, so be wary about studs and bolts rounding, the little Torx fixings. It's not inherently unknown at this age. A couple of things I haven't mentioned before. I am looking for some sound deafening for my own car. They can go a bit baggy because it's several layers of recycled material, and it just sort of it just bags over time. So I think I'm going to look at an aftermarket one, and the aftermarket ones are about 70 quid, so expensive, but I think the OEM ones are starting to all look a bit baggy now. Unfortunately, this is disgusting. I feel like ripping this off. This sound deafening is disgusting, but trying to rip it off this car, probably impossible without removing the entire engine bay. I got lucky in mine because there's so little pipes, but with all the ABS stuff at the back as well, and the cruise control, oh, it's impossible. Absolutely impossible without stripping it out. But it's just raining dust everywhere. It's horrible. There is just a few things that I'm going to finish off with very, very quickly. This sensor, it is a sensor, by the way. This little thing that looks unplugged on the side of the battery cover. How many posts have I seen where people have asked what this thing is attached to the battery, like it's some sort of alien being? And that is an engine bay temperature sensor, put very simply. There's a lot of things going on in this engine bay. It's a bigger engine, it's a lot more, there's a lot less space to work around, and the temperature under this engine in this engine bay is a lot hotter than what you get in a Sigma. They were a bit concerned about this, so they put this here. Now I'm not quite sure what that would entail. Maybe it would tell the ECU, well obviously it's going to tell the ECU some information, but what the ECU decides to do, I'm not quite sure. Does it retard the engine a little bit to make it less powerful, therefore less heat? Does it switch the coolant fans on? Maybe. Maybe that engine bay temperature sensor is mainly an accompaniment for the temperature sensor that is connected to the thermostat housing. And that, yes, by the way, I want to point one thing out. There is no cylinder head temperature sensor on a Zetec, unlike a Sigma. It's not there. It's bolted, it's just attached around the thermostat housing, okay? And it is a coolant temperature sensor, not a cylinder head temperature sensor. It measures the temperature of the coolant. Slightly more old school, traditional, that's fine. It just tells the ECU what it needs to know in order to switch the fans on or off. I've got a feeling that that also works in tandem with the system to switch the fans on. But I've got a feeling that the performance might be reduced fractionally if it was a bit concerned about the temperatures and the fans weren't doing enough quickly enough, if you know what I mean. To reduce the temperature, I should say. You will find a resonator box on the right hand side of the airbox. You will not have this if you do not have a gear or a diesel, quite frankly. Its job, it's just a hollow box. Have you seen inside it? It's just a hollow box. There's a lot of science. Someone somewhere, an acoustic engineer, designed that box and said that is going to reduce the sound of the air intake, of the air going into the engine, the air intake. On my car, that's just, there's a little, where it attaches on the side, there's just a little blanking slot where it's not meant for my airbox. This airbox, by the way, is complete. I think it's actually the same. Potentially it's the same airbox throughout the petrol range. I've got a feeling it might be the same, but might be different. But it has a resonator. This one would not fit my car because it would have a hole there for the resonator. I could fit one to mine if I wanted to quieten down a bit, but there's no need because it's not original to my car, so I'm not interested. But yeah, that's what that is. And they don't go wrong because it's just a plastic box, you know, come on. Anyway, I think pretty much I have covered all that I need to cover with a Zetec engine. That's it. That is literally it. Everything else that I've covered before, there are some jobs that I've listed already and I've spoken to Jason about. So he's very much in mind that to eliminate all the weak spots. And those are your weak spots. Cam belt, oil change, the coolant pipe across the front, thermostat housing, maybe an inlet manifold refurbishment to unlock some horses and just make sure it's all good at the back. Clean the idle air control valve. That's it. And at 20 years of age plus, this is as worse as it gets for a Mark 1. And that's how good these cars are, if you don't know already. Anyway, look after yourselves. I hope this video has been useful as always. You take care, and I shall see you in another episode with a completely different car, I think. Take care. That is a cold start. Unbelievable.